She is considered a public intellectual, a writer, a philosopher, but also a leading voice within the Afro-Brazilian women's rights movement. She's been a critical voice for social inclusion and justice through some of her prolific writing. And in fact, just last year, she was selected as one of just 51 authors from 25 countries to contribute to the Freedom Papers, which is a series of essays exploring issues that relate to freedom. She has spoken up consistently and strongly against racial discrimination in her native Brazil. She is Djamila Ribeiro, and she is being honored for her profound intellectual and conceptual work on systems of oppression and for providing strong, logical opposition to the dominant racist and sexist paradigm in Brazil. She's being honored as well for her incisive reflections on democracy and social participation, and for articulating heavily politicized subjects with calm lucidity, and in fact making them accessible, not just on academic platforms, but through social media as well. And she is finally also being recognized for her generous leadership in connecting her personal experiences to the lives of others, and her energetic activism, and for consistently breaking the silence. Please welcome Djamila Ribeiro.
Good evening. First of all, I'd like to thank Prince Claus Fund for this opportunity. I'm very happy to be here. I'll try to speak in English. I hope you understand, but if you complain, I can speak in Portuguese. So, you can tell me what you prefer. And I'd like to thank you to be here this night, everybody to be here this evening. Well, there is a young black feminist in Brazil called Mónica, and she used to say that I was never shy, I was silenced. And this sentence for me was very important to understand my childhood, to understand why many times in schools I was very ashamed to talk or to say that I knew something. And made me understand how in school they told us the history just by one perspective, the white man perspective. They didn't tell me that during the slavery time in Brazil, there were a lot of resistance, a lot of black people and indigenous people that were fighting against the system. They didn't tell me about marvelous women, black women, indigenous women that were leading demonstration and trying to construct another world. So for me, that's why for me it's very important to write. It's very important to break the silence. It's very important to understand how the history was constructed by just one way. And you need to confront the hegemonic idea, the hegemonic history that denies us humanity. That's why I've published 3 books already, and also I am a writer that publishes other authors. I coordinate a collection called Plural Feminism, and you have already published 7 authors. There are small books with didactic language and affordable prices, because we think that's important to people to have the opportunity to think about their reality. It's important to people to understand why racism work in our society, to understand that racism is a structure, to understand that racism not only when a famous black person, is attacked in the internet. And in the Brazilian society, all the time that happens, say something like that, wow, it's so horrible. Racism still exists in Brazil. And my question is, when racism did not exist? And how people look in a natural way when they go, for example, to University of São Paulo, which is the major university in Latin America, and they go to the philosophy department. I've studied philosophy. I have a master in political philosophy. And they go to the philosophy department and look and see that all the professors are white and men. And these same people go to the bathroom, to the restroom, And the women that are cleaning that place are all black and poor. And people do not question why it happened. People treat in a natural way why we have historically been a part of opportunity. These are some images of the book launch that we do in Brazil, in different regions of Brazil, because we think it's important to talk to people, because we think it's important to people feel that they also can think, they also produce critical reflections, that they also discuss the Brazilian society. But more than that, to give tools to these people to understand the society, to fight against the racism, to fight against all this violence, this historical violence in Brazil. Now I want to finish, because my time is ending, I'd like to show these pictures to you and honor all these black and poor people here. These youth people were brutally assassinated in the past weekend in Brazil. In Brazil, in every 23 minutes, a young man is killed by the police. The war on drugs, that actually it's war on black people, the criminalization of favelas, the criminalization of the black youth in Brazil. And all these young people were in a party in a favela in Brazil called Paraisópolis in São Paulo. And the police came there and started to hit all the people there, because there is a project in Brazil of the criminalization of funk, which is a very popular rhythm in Brazil. So I'd like to say their names, because not saying their names is the first step for deshumanization. I'd like to honor Marcos Paulo Oliveira, 16 years old, Denis Guilherme dos Santos, 16 years old, Denis Quirino, also 16, Gustavo Xavier, 14, Bruno Gabriel, 22, Eduardo Silva, 21, Mateus dos Santos, 23, Gabriel Rogério, 20, Luara Vitória, 18 years old. Most of these kids should be my children. I have a daughter that has the same age of many of these young people here. So I'd like to honor the memory of these youth, because a country that kills the youth is not thinking about the future. My first reaction for this brutal assassination was to be very sad. This kind of thing kills us inside. But on the other hand, I think it's important to say for all these young people here that you are keeping fighting, because you have the right to be alive. Thank you.
Djamila Ribeiro, of course, congratulations on this award. And just listening to you speak, of course, it's the personal. You have a young daughter, as you say, but you also always put the fight for freedom within a collective dimension. For you, it's an issue of solidarity.
Yes.
The collective dimension being more important, as you say, than the individual. I was struck when I heard you say that 90% of books published in the last few decades, certainly within your lifetime, have all been published by white men.
Yes.
Is this one of those realities about Brazil that so many of us simply don't know, and how do you change it?
Well, I think the first step is to start discussing the origins of inequality, to understand that Brazil was the last country in America to abolish slavery, and how this legacy structures our society. People in Brazil cannot treat racism as an individual issue, but as a system, and how the social privilege produces the epistemic privilege. And it's not only about theories. When you write a book, it's not only about theoretical area, because these young people here, for example, the colonial view creates the idea that black people are dangerous, that black people are violent. So when these people die, for example, or are murdered, what people think, that a lot of people in Brazil saying, oh, they must deserve it, they must be thieves, something like that. So this is not only about theory, because this colonial view created this idea. That's why I think it's important to us to write, to create different possibilities of existence that is not marked by the colonial violence.
But as you mentioned, I mean, it is a structural legacy that has been left by colonialism and that has so profoundly left an imprint on the way the Black community in Brazil is being perceived by the outside world within the country as well. Today, when you look at the dynamics, the socio-political, economic dynamics within your own country, do you see the situation improving for the better, or are you seeing quite the reverse? Of course, there's a certain president in place who I presume makes many of us wish that Pelé had actually run for president, but nonetheless, is it making the debate more available these days? Are people discussing the issue more than they used to?
Yes, despite Bolsonaro, not my president. Yes, I think if you can find a positive way about Bolsonaro, is that now people are talking more about this issue. And I think that the Black movement in Brazil historically have been fighting to put racism in the public debate. And I think now we are talking more about that. We have more discussing on feminism, on gender issues. And I think it's important to show that Brazil is not only about all this violence, but Brazil is also about the resistance, about people that are struggling. There was an important leading Black feminist in Brazil who used to say that our history is not only a history of pain, but also a legacy of struggle. So I think it's important to show to people that in Brazil, from this legacy, we are fighting against all this oppression.
And Djamila, just finally, on a personal level, you mentioned your daughter, you mentioned the kind of legacy you want to help create, and you've already done so much to push the boundaries through some of your prolific writing. But if there was one thing more that you wish you could do to achieve that mission, what might it be?
Wow. This project that I coordinate, it's an independent project. Me and my big team of 2 people, we do everything. We don't have any kind of institutional support. So I think people should look to this project. That's why I'm very happy to be here for the recognition, because sometimes in my own country, people look at me like the crazy woman or the woman that only talk about that. The problem is why everybody are not talking about that. So for me, it's important to have all this support, this solidarity. I think the solidarity, the transnational struggle that's going to make us, leave a legacy.
And of course, it is people who dare to be different to actually make an impact. Djamila Ribeiro, thank you so very much indeed.
Thank you.